So I recently played through the first couple Bioshock games for the first time in several years, and the first game is hailed as one of the greatest games of all time, and rightfully so, I think. The game is just packed with ideas, and the gameplay is really refreshing compared to most other first-person shooters. The art design is just beautiful, and I think that the story has a lot to say. I feel like a lot of people already know this about Bioshock, so I won't dive too much into it, but a lot of Andrew Ryan's philosophy is based on Ayn Rand. I haven't read any of her books, so I'm just going to parrot what I've always heard about her stuff, which is just that the big takeaway is that every man is for himself. I've always heard her work described as justifications for being selfish and for not caring about other people, essentially. And I think that's how I would describe Andrew Ryan, the villain of Bioshock 1. He's selfish. He's not evil like the Joker. He's not someone who's just trying to create chaos for the sake of chaos. He's primarily selfish, and so he does things that hurt other people, but he's doing so because it benefits him. I think that there are things that he does that are just straight up malicious and unnecessary, but on the whole, I would describe him as just self-serving. And I think that's one of the things that makes him such a gripping and interesting villain, is that you can relate to his struggles. The message from Andrew Ryan that you see in the bathysphere at the very beginning of the game is directed to everyone. On paper, Rapture sounds incredible. It is a place where everyone is able to actually do what they want and to live how they would like to live. Scientists are free to experiment however they may. Artists and writers are free to make whatever art or literature they want. And on the whole, it just sounds like a wonderful place, and that's how he sells it to people. But then also, it's one of those things to where it's like, hey, if you make a city that doesn't have any laws, then you shouldn't be surprised when it all goes to crap. And so I think these are the ideas that keep you going through Bioshock 1. Because in very simple terms, Bioshock 1 is all about showing you the problems that selfishness brings. And that is a purposefully basic and simplistic understanding of the game. So Bioshock 1 throws you into this really incredible world, and it's not perfect, it has a lot of flaws. For instance, I think that once Andrew Ryan is taken out of the picture, the game continues for another 3 levels with Fontaine as the villain, and I think that part is just kind of lesser than the first 2/3 or so of the game. So I think it drags on too long. I think there are a couple mechanics that just aren't fun, like the camera, I don't enjoy at all, and the hacking, I don't think is very good. But Bioshock 1 can easily stand as one of the greatest games of all time just because it provides a unique experience. And I think that's the key, is it provides an experience that you cannot get anywhere else. Sure, there are plenty of games out there with fantastic, beautiful art direction. There are plenty of games out there with fantastic stories, and there are so many FPS games that have fantastic shooting. But Bioshock takes all of these things and wraps them together in a bundle that is really innovative and special. Now, Bioshock 1 takes place in 1960, so with Bioshock 2, they ran the clock forward about 8 years, and it takes place in 1968. I think that whenever you make a sequel to something, you're given 2 opportunities, really. Number 1, you can try to do something that is similar, something that is the same but bigger and better, essentially. And I think that's the route that most people go. It's easy to look at something, to figure out what its flaws are, and then to go, hey, why don't we just make a new one of these, but fix the flaws? And the second thing that a sequel can do is do something more experimental. It can do something that is maybe not directly related to the original work, or do something that is just completely different. It can twist the original work in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's really kind of what Bioshock Infinite tried to do. And I think that's what Silent Hill actually successfully did. Because the first game was a weird game about cults, and then the second game was about a man trying to find his dead wife. It went in a completely different direction, the art style is very different, the gameplay is basically the same, but on the whole Silent Hill 2 feels very different than Silent Hill 1. Now, I think Bioshock 2 went the first route. I think that Bioshock 2 tried to do Bioshock 1 just bigger and better. And Bioshock 2 is a very good game. I feel confident in saying that, and that's not a huge grandiose statement to say that it's a very good game, but it is. It is a very good game. I think that the combat is better. I think that they ironed out some kinks, such as the hacking and the camera, which both sucked in Bioshock 1. And I think there really is a lot to love about Bioshock 2. I don't think that the writing is as good as it was in Bioshock 1, because I think the villain, Sophia Lamb, is harder to get a grasp on than Andrew Ryan because she seems to want the opposite thing of him. Whereas Andrew Ryan was super selfish, Sophia Lamb is super selfless. She seems to be focused on the idea of creating a utopia. And she is a hypocrite and she does do selfish things, but alas, that is kind of her overarching philosophy, is that she is for selflessness, whereas Andrew Ryan was primarily selfish. And I think that she's harder to get a grasp on because I think that it's easier to just kind of be selfish than to be selfless. But whatever. What I wanted to address was the tragedy of sequels. Because it's really sad the way that Bioshock 2 has actually come to be remembered. Because for years, I actually hated it. For years after I played it, I really despised it. And then after I played it recently, I was like, why did I hate this game? Because it's really good. but I think that really what it boils down to is that it's not unique. Whenever you first start playing Bioshock 1, everything about the game feels special. The city of Rapture is presented in a way that is super interesting. Right at the start, it is built up as a city where you can do anything, and then as you progress through the game, you go, oh crap, people actually did do anything. So one of my favorite examples of this is Dr. Steinman. Steinman is a plastic surgeon who becomes bored of doing the typical plastic surgery jobs, such as nose jobs or whatever else. And so, citing Picasso, he decides to rearrange people's faces in interesting ways. And in a city without laws, it's like, yeah, that's just something you can do, I guess. And so I think Bioshock 1 has this sense of newness about it. Or another example is how you find out that Andrew Ryan got all these people to come to Rapture. He got all of them to come to the bottom of the ocean, and then he charged them money to see trees and to spend time in a forest, because it is an artificially maintained forest at the bottom of the ocean. And so I think Bioshock 1 is really good at taking these ideas and following them to their logical conclusions. Bioshock 1 is, excuse the pun, shocking. It surprised me with how far it is willing to take certain ideas. The idea of big daddies and little sisters is horrific. The idea that you take these little girls, you turn them into monsters, and then you send them to corpses to collect Adam, aka the substance that gives you superpowers essentially. And then you take these men, and then you twist them, you ruin their vocal cords, you brainwash them into being these mechanical beasts who are linked up to these little girls. All of it is just horrific. And I think that's a lot of why Bioshock 1 works so well. I don't know if it's exactly a horror game, but it still manages to scare you and terrify you in a lot of ways. But by the time you start playing Bioshock 2, all of that newness is gone. And I think that's the saddest thing to me about Bioshock 2, is that when I started playing it, I wasn't excited by returning to Rapture. I just kind of felt like it was another place. Rapture, the marvel that was the city underwater, had now become mundane. As I learned more about Rapture's history, it just all felt less special to me. It became just another fantasy world. And I think that's the biggest problem with doing sequels that aim to be bigger and better. You lose that sense of specialness. You lose that sense of uniqueness as you keep on coming back to the same place. And so I played Bioshock 2 through, and I thought it was a lot of fun, and I thought that the gameplay improved on so many aspects of the first one. And I do think it tried to do a lot of things to separate it from the first game. One obvious example of this that I mentioned earlier is that Sophia Lamb is the complete opposite of Andrew Ryan. Because in the first game it feels like they were commenting on how selfishness ultimately destroys cities, but then in Bioshock 2 you see the opposite taken to its own extreme. And so I really like what they were trying to do with that. And I think that it even tried to approach the story differently, because in the first game you don't have an emotional connection to the player character. You don't really care about Jack, but it surprises you because there are several twists and there are things that you learn about him that make him an interesting character. And so Bioshock 1 is a story that makes you think, whereas Bioshock 2 attempted to be a story that makes you feel. And it wants to generate an emotional connection with the player because it's a story about a big daddy trying to get back with his little sister, aka his daughter, essentially. I can't really say that I developed an emotional connection to any of these characters in the second game, but I appreciate what it was trying to do. And then another example of this is that the game takes place nearly a decade later. And so they were trying to do a lot to separate it from the first game and to make it stand on its own, but ultimately it can't. Oftentimes whenever people talk about sequels or reboots or anything of that nature, they will say that, yeah, this thing is good, but you have to separate it from the rest of the series. Yeah, this reboot is actually great, you just have to forget about the other Devil May Cry games. Yeah, this Spider-Man movie is awesome if you forget about the ones that came before it. Yeah, this Bioshock game is great if you forget about the revolutionary first game that came before it. And so it's really sad to me that Bioshock 2 is a game that ultimately cannot stand on its own. And it can't stand on its own. It's constantly making references to the first game. In fact, I don't even know if you could understand the story of this second game without having played the first one. And so I think that really in the end, Bioshock 2 is a game that is too similar to Bioshock 1 for its own good. Even in spite of all the changes they made, and in spite of the changes in weaponry and how guns handle and how the plasmids handle, I think that it's just unable to deliver that same feeling that you got from playing the first game. And I don't even think that you have to have delivered the same feeling as the first game, but rather I think that it is unable to deliver a comparable feeling in the second game. The first game wowed me and drew me in with its story and with its characters and with the place they had built up. And so in order to be a successful sequel, it didn't have to attack those same things, and it doesn't. A sequel doesn't need to give you the exact same feeling as the first thing in order to be good. But I think that ultimately, if it doesn't do that, then it's like, what are we doing here? Are you trying to make something that stands on its own as a piece of art, or are you just trying to make a product to sell? Most sequels, to me, feel like things that were only made because the first one did well. And I think that a lot of the time, even those can be fun. A lot of the time, even those can be special, and they can be really good. And I think Bioshock 2, as I've been saying, is really good. But because of the fact that it's unable to stand on its own 2 feet, it was always destined to have been forgotten about, I think. Or maybe not forgotten, but it was always destined to have been remembered less fondly. And it's like, why should it be remembered as fondly as Bioshock 1? Because it's like, what's cooler, building your own city under the ocean, or taking over the city that someone else built? And I played through the Minerva's Den DLC after beating Bioshock 2, and that stuff is freaking great. I think everything in the DLC is better than the main game. I think the DLC hits harder emotionally, and also I think that the gameplay is just more innovative and interesting. And so the DLC is something that I would recommend to everyone, honestly. And I think this is part of the tragedy of sequels too. Minerva's Den is DLC for the second game, but it's not really linked to it story-wise all that much, and it's all the better for it. But even that is kind of forgotten about a lot of the time. And the reason why you go the safe route and try to do a sequel that's bigger and better is because you know that people will immediately buy it because they'll go, oh yeah, I like the first one. Whereas if you do something that is more experimental and crazier, it might be a bit of a harder sell. But then as we see with Bioshock Infinite, I think, if you go too far, then it can just kind of go off rails. And it's like, hey, maybe we just shouldn't have done a sequel in the first place. Maybe we should have just spun all of this off into its own thing. But again, this goes back to the money aspect. And this goes back to it being a harder sell to sell people new things as opposed to sequels. There's not a built-in audience for new things. And so anyways, Bioshock 2 is great. And honestly, I recommend it to anyone who's interested. But just don't be surprised that it doesn't make you feel the same way that the first game did. Real quick, I wanted to give a shout out to Polymacho's excellent Bioshock retrospective. Without watching it, I may not have replayed these games as soon as I did, so thanks to him for that. So thank you for watching. Check out my other stuff if you'd like, and have a nice night.